our lecturer Dr. Aziz bin Jamal. We are from Group 6, presenting a topic about the respiratory system. Before that, I want to introduce all the members in this group, which are Nazatun Noha binti Haidi, Nur Alia Suraya binti Izani, Ungku Nedi Nurhana binti Ungku Hasan, Siti Khadijah binti Farid, and Nur Shazadin binti Muhammad Syafiq. Each of them will present the topic given.
Greeting to everyone again. My name is Nazatun Noha binti Haidi. I will explain to you the medical term related to anatomy, diseases and procedures. First and foremost is the medical term related to anatomy. In the respiratory system, it consists of nasal cavity, moved to pharynx, or also known as throat, that divided into three parts, which are nasopharynx, oropharynx and laryngopharynx. Next is the epiglottis, larynx, which is also known as voice box, trachea or windpipe that connects the bronchus to the lung. Bronchi, also known as primary bronchi, divided and subsided into increasingly smaller bronchioles, which are the smaller branches of the bronchi. At the end of each bronchiole, there are very small grape-like clusters, which are the alveoli. That consists of alveolar duct and alveoli sacs. And lastly, under the lung, where there is a diaphragm. In medical term related to disease, there are asthma. It's a chronic inflammatory disease of the bronchial tubes, often triggered by an allergic reaction. Secondly is the asphyxia. It's the loss of consciousness that occurs when the body cannot get the oxygen it needs to function. While dysphonia is a difficulty in speaking, which may include any impairment in vocal quality. In medical term related to the procedures, there are tracheostomy. Tracheostomy is the surgical creation of a stoma into the trachea below the vocal cords to insert a temporary or permanent tube to facilitate breathing. Next is the laryngoscopy. It's the visual examination of the larynx and vocal cord using a flexible or rigid laryngoscope inserted through the mouth. And lastly is the bronchodilator. It's an inhaled medication that relaxes and expands the bronchial passages into the lungs.
Next, I'm going to share about the upper respiratory tract. Consists of the nose, nostrils, mouth, pharynx, epiglottis and larynx. Firstly is the nose. Nostrils air enter the body through the nose and passes through the nasal cavity, which is the interior portion of the nose. The nostrils are the external openings of the nose. It consists of nasal septum, which is a wall of cartilage that divides the nose into two equal sections. A septum is a wall that separates two chambers. Next is cilia. The thin hairs located just inside the nostrils filter incoming air to remove debris. Then, mucous membranes line the nose. These specialized tissues also line the digestive, reproductive, and urinary system, as well as other parts of the respiratory system. The fourth one is mucus. It's the slippery secretion produced by the mucous membranes that protects and lubricates these tissues. In the nose, mucus helps moisten, warm, and filter the air as it enters. Mucus is the secretion that flows from the tissue. And lastly, the olfactory receptors are nerve endings that act as the receptors for the sense of smell. They are also important to the sense of taste. These receptors are located in the mucous membrane in the upper part of the nasal cavity. Moving on to tonsils. The tonsils and adenoids are part of the lymphatic system. The tonsils, also called the palatine tonsils, are located at the back of the mouth. The adenoids, also called the nasopharyngeal tonsils, are high up behind the nose and the roof of the mouth. Next is the paranasal sinuses. The paranasal sinuses, which are air-filled cavities lined with mucous membrane, are located in the bones of the skull. A sinus can be a sac or cavity in any organ or tissue. However, the term sinus most commonly refers to the paranasal sinuses. The sinuses are connected to the nasal cavity via short ducts. The four pairs of paranasal sinuses are located on either side of the nose and are named for the bones in which they are located. For example, the frontal sinuses are located in the frontal bone just above the eyebrows. Next is the sphenoid sinuses, which are located in the sphenoid bone behind the eye and under the pituitary gland and close to the optic nerves. Third one is the maxillary sinuses, which are the largest of the paranasal sinuses, are located in the maxillary bones under the eyes. Lastly, the ethmoid sinuses, which are located in the ethmoid bones between the nose and the eyes, are irregularly shaped air cells that are separated from the orbital, which is the eye cavity, by only a thin layer of a bone. On the other hand, the pharynx, which is commonly known as the throat, receives the air after it passes through the nose or mouth as well as food. The pharynx is made up of three divisions. The nasopharynx from the picture is the yellow part, which is the posterior to the nasal cavity and continues downward to behind the mouth. The oropharynx is the green part, is the portion that is visible when looking into the mouth. Thirdly, the blue part is the laryngopharynx, which is also shared by both the respiratory and digestive systems. Air, food, and fluids continues downward to the openings of the esophagus and trachea, where air enters the trachea and food and fluids flow into the esophagus. At the same time, the epiglottis is a lid-like structure located at the base of the tongue, swings downward and closes off the laryngopharynx so that food does not enter the trachea and the lungs. Lastly, the larynx, also known as the voice box, is a triangular chamber between the pharynx and the trachea. The larynx is protected and supported by a series of 9 separate cartilages. That's all from me for the upper respiratory tract. For the lower part, my dear friend Unku Nelly will share to you about it.
Right, now let's move to the anatomy of lower respiratory tract. The lower respiratory tract comprises of the trachea, the bronchi, the bronchioles, alveoli, and the lungs. Firstly, the trachea is commonly known as windpipe. It is located just below the larynx and located directly in front of the esophagus. It is the main airway to the lungs. The trachea divides into 2 branches called bronchi. The main bronchi undergoes further branching, forming the secondary bronchi. The secondary bronchi will then divide into tertiary bronchi, then into smaller airways called bronchiole. At the end of the bronchiole, there are alveoli, also known as air sacs. It is where the gas is exchanged. Altogether, there are around 300 million alveoli in adult lungs, providing a large surface area for adequate gas exchange. Bronchi, bronchiole, and alveoli are all part of the lungs. The lungs are made of a light and soft elastic tissue, and it is the major organs of the respiratory system. The lungs, which are the essential organs of respiration, are divided into loops. The right lung has 3 loops, which are upper, middle, and lower loop. Meanwhile, the left lung has only 2 loops, which is upper and lower loop.
Hi, my name is Siti Khadija, and now I will explain about the physiology of the upper respiratory tracts. For your information, the function of the upper respiratory tract is involved in conduction or the movement of air into and out of the body. The upper respiratory tract organ provide a route of air to move between the outside atmosphere and also the lungs. The incoming air will clean and also warm, so no gas exchange occur in this organ.
In this physiology of the upper respiratory tracts, I will cover about the nasal cavity, pharynx, and also the larynx. Now, I will explain about the nasal cavity. What is the nasal cavity? The nasal cavity is a large air-filled space in the skull above and behind the nose in the middle of the face. It is continuation of 2 nostrils. As inhaled air flows through the nasal cavity, it is warmed by blood vessel very close to the surface of this epithelial tissue. Hair in the nose and mucus produced by the mucous membranes help to trap larger foreign particles in the air before they go deeper into the respiratory tracts. In addition to its respiratory function, the nasal cavity also contains chemoreceptors needed for sense of smell and also contribution to the sense of taste. Now, I would like to jump to the pharynx. The pharynx is a tube-like structure that connects with the nasal cavity and the back of the mouth to the other structure lower in the throat, including the larynx. The pharynx have dual function, which is air and also foods. Air passes from the nasal cavity through the pharynx to the larynx as well as in opposite directions, while food passes from the mouth through the pharynx and pass to the esophagus. Last but not least, I will explain about the larynx. The larynx connect with the pharynx and trachea and help to conduct air through the respiratory tracts. The larynx is called the voice box because it contains the vocal cords, which vibrate when air flows over them, producing sound. You can see in the vocal cord in the larynx in figure 13.2.3 and also 13.2.4. Certain muscles in the larynx move the vocal cord apart to allow the breathing. Other muscles in the larynx move the vocal cord together to allow the producing the vocal sounds. The latter muscle also control the pitch of sounds and help to control their volume.
Next, we continue with physiology, lower respiratory tract. The lower respiratory system or lower respiratory tract consists of the trachea, the bronchi and bronchioles and the alveoli, which make up the lungs.
This structure pulls in air from the upper respiratory system, absorb the oxygen and release carbon dioxide in exchange. Other structures, namely the thoracic cage and the diaphragm, protect and support these functions. The trachea is a tube less than an inch in diameter, covered by cartilaginous rings. It extends from the bottom of the larynx down behind the sternum until it branches into smaller tube, the bronchi. During inhalation, air filtered and warmed by the upper respiratory system pass from the pharynx and larynx into the trachea, then down to the bronchi and into the lungs. The oxygenated air from the lungs passes back up through the trachea during exhalation. The cartilaginous rings support the tube of the trachea and prevent it from overexpanding or from collapsing, like when you suck on a straw too hard. There are C-shaped with a gap on the posterior side. This allows the trachea to bend when the esophagus presses against it as food is swallowed. The tubes of the primary bronchi branch off from the bottom of the trachea. These branches subdivide further into secondary and tertiary bronchi and then into the bronchiolus. These progressively smaller airway deliver oxygen-rich air from the trachea to the lungs. During exhalation, the oxygenated air, now rich with carbon dioxide, leaves the lungs by the reverse route. When we exercise, relaxation of smooth muscle into the bronchiolus causes them to dilate. This bronchodilation allows greater ventilation. Allergic reaction and histamines cause the opposite effect. The lungs are responsible for gas exchange between the air we breathe and our bodies. They are protected inside the thoracic cage. The left lung has two lobes and is slightly smaller in volume than the right. It curves in and the cardiac node to accommodate to the heart. The right lung has three lobes. It is slightly shorter because the diaphragm muscle sits higher below it to accommodate the liver. During inhalation, air flows into the lungs through the bronchi and bronchiolus. Oxygen from the air is then absorbed into the bloodstream. It passes through millions of microscopic, the alveoli into surrounding capillaries. Carbon dioxide waste diffuse the opposite way from the capillaries to the alveoli. The lungs expel the deoxygenated air during exhalation. Oxygen diffuses through the alveoli into networks of pulmonary capillaries that surround them and is pumped through the bloodstream. Carbon dioxide from the oxygenated blood diffuses from the capillaries into the alveoli and is expelled through exhalation.